In the largest sense, life, reality, is beautiful, is good. If we look at life's trajectory from non-existence to that miraculous moment, meaning there isn't a single scientist that can adequately explain, let alone reproduce in a double-blind lab experiment, the beginning of the universe. You know, the narrative is that the universe didn't exist, and then poof, a magic spell, and life bursts into being in an impossibly small object, less than the size of a pea or a kernel of corn. And from that very moment, some billions of years ago, life has been getting bigger, more complex, more diverse in every possible direction, to the point where life is now so big that we cannot even adequately measure. And by the time that we adequately could potentially measure the distance of the universe, it's bigger than that, right? So life has an incredible track record of getting more complex, more intelligent, larger, longer, and having more, it creates more time, more space, more intelligence, and more complexity within that time and space from its very moment of existence, right? And so if you love existence, if you love life, if you love anything at all, then life's been doing an incredible job at creating everything out of nothing. So that's the big picture. Life has become more intelligent, bigger, more complex, longer, meaning in time. There's more and more time, there's more and more space. And life has been having sex with itself throughout that entire period, meaning the way that things become more and more complex and more diverse simultaneously is that no sooner does life divide itself into an infinite number of distinctions, then some of those distinctions start interacting with others of those distinctions in a way that gives birth to yet more diversity, more distinctions. And then those diverse things interact with to produce even more life, right? So if you like anything about life, life has given birth to itself with that protocol. Now, it's a very beautiful thing to create something out of nothing. It's a very beautiful thing to create something so sustainable. Meaning if life didn't know what it was doing at any point in the last 30, 20, 15 billion years, it would have stopped existing, right? The fact that life is still here in any form at all means that life knows how to be sustainable. And if life didn't know how to keep having sex with itself, then there would be nothing new, right? A flower wouldn't know how to create a new bulb so that next year there's even more flowers. A dandelion wouldn't know how to give seed in a way that a field of dandelions, right? So life is always changing, becoming more complex, more intelligent over time. And if it didn't know how to do that for even a single year in the evolution of life, in the cycle of life, then life would have stopped changing, and there'd been no more change, would be stagnant. So it's beautiful that life keeps creating life. It's beautiful that life keeps iterating. It's beautiful that life gets older every single minute of its existence while retaining its roots, right? It retains what it once had, but gets older, creates more and more time and space. And even in the history of individual people or groups of people, over time, as the population has expanded, the amount of suffering per capita, poverty per capita, is going down. The amount of total war is going up as the population goes from 1 billion to towards 10 billion, but the amount of war per person is coming down. The amount of education per person is going up. The amount of income per person is going up. The freedoms of the average person are going up per capita around the globe, meaning if you look at different points in history, how many people were serfs, how many people were slaves, how many people had no rights, females, etc. You can see a trajectory where there is more freedom, more rights, less war per person, even though the total amount of suffering, of course, increases because every person has a certain amount of suffering, a certain amount of well-being. But the amount of suffering per person is going down. The amount of crime per person is going down, even as the total amount of the population is expanding. So there's a lot to see in terms of beauty. Now, beauty has a definition. It's a word, so we create a frame called beauty, and then we have reality. And in order for beauty to mean anything as a word, it has to have contrast. So it has to have ugly, right? So you have beauty, you have to have ugly, and in order to understand beauty, you have to understand ugly. And in order to understand ugly, there have to be certain things that you consider ugly. Otherwise, in a comparative framework where a word is supposed to describe one part of reality distinct from another, you cannot have beauty without ugliness. You cannot have good without evil. You cannot have black without white. You've got to be able to make a comparison in order for the words to have any meaning. Right? If the only word is white, and you say this is white, and this is white, and this is white, and this is white, it stops having any meaning. There has to be contrast. And so in the creation of beauty, there is the creation of ugliness. But the question is, right, if we look at the world, if we look at ourselves, which we might consider a microcosm, a fractal representation of the world, and we see ourselves as basically ugly, we will feel bad. If we see ourselves as basically beautiful with some ugly elements, we will feel good. So in that process of creating a more beautiful world, we have a couple mechanisms at our disposal. The first thing is just seeing the beauty of life as a whole, that life is creating life in this miraculous expression over the last tens of billions of years. Another thing that we can do is we can expand our awareness of what we find beautiful and other things. And the way we do this is, let's say that we find a lily. And we say, what a beautiful lily. Well, if we look deeply at the lily, right? If we look at the beauty of that lily, if we look deeply at that lily, we can see that the lily requires water. And so if the lily is beautiful, we might rationally expand the sense of beauty to say that water is beautiful as it nourishes a lily. But we might also say that in order for there to be a lily, we need a planet. And we might say that the earth is beautiful. We might also say that in order for the lily to bloom, it must have nutrition. And so feces, right? The rotting, decomposed plants that create compost, or the rotting, decomposing manure that has the most potent nitrogen for the most blooms, becomes beautiful. You have no lily without a root. You have no root without soil. Right? So muddy soil becomes beautiful for a water lily. Right? The water lily is interdependent with muddy soil at the bottom of the pond, of the lake. So the bottom of the pond, the muddy soil, becomes beautiful as we deepen our understanding. And so in this path, right, in this path, we can slowly consume all of reality as becoming beautiful. Right? If we think deeply enough, we find that all things are connected to that lily. Right? Time. If there was no time, there could be no lily. Space. If there was no space, there could be no lily. Right? And then you start thinking, that lily came into being, but in order for that lily to come into being, other things had to die. Other things had to not come into being, right? You think of the process of water flowing and forming into a hollow. Well, water flows down the mountain, enters a hollow, and then continues flowing down. Well, if it weren't for that water, there would be trees, there would be forest here. But those forests are precluded by the water, even as the lily is included, is facilitated by the water. So you could say the death of those probable trees are necessary for the birth of this probable lily, of this actual lily. And so the death of other things becomes beautiful in the light of the birth of something beautiful. The death and the birth become connected. The soil and the sky become connected. The flower and the root become connected. And the observer, the one that looks at a lily and finds it beautiful, becomes connected to the beauty of the lily. Because is the lily truly beautiful if no one is there to see it with eyes capable of seeing beauty? Does a wolf look at a lily and see beauty? Right? And so the eyes capable of seeing beauty are also beautiful as it sees the beauty in the lily. Right? And so in this way, we move towards a reality that is a beautiful reality by understanding, by picking something, anything that we find beautiful, and then following its thread through space and time all the way back to the Big Bang, where we understand its relationship, its relay of energy, its association with everything else and with us. And through finding one beautiful thing, the world, through deep understanding, becomes beautiful. Now, the same can occur in reverse. Because we might start with something that we consider to be fundamentally ugly. That's our starting point. This is ugly. And we define it in this way, this is ugly. And then we start seeing that, okay, hitting a child is ugly. Or what? Mud is ugly. We said that mud, it's ugly, ugly mud, right? Well, if the mud is ugly, and then you have lilies that depend on that mud, then the lilies are ugly by association, right? So you can go the opposite way. You can say mud is, I just can't stand it. Mud, I hate it. It's ugly, it's bad, fundamentally bad. So then all life is ugly, right? Because the lily depends on the mud, so that becomes ugly. But also trees depend on, compost and soil and mud, so they become ugly. People depend on trees to eat, for shade, for weather moderation, so they become ugly. Vegetables depend on mud. Animals depend on mud, so they become ugly. So you can start with something, your core, and we get to pick what the core is. Do we focus and pick on something that we consider to be fundamentally ugly, bad, unlovable, undesirable, etc., as the core thing, and then work its way around to where we and everything else, life, where God made a mistake, basically, is where we end up, because the Big Bang never should have happened, because if it hadn't happened, then this wouldn't have happened, then that wouldn't have happened, and ultimately, right, we shouldn't have happened, we're a mistake. And so everything about life is also a mistake, if we carry the logic through. So we create beauty by starting at the center with something precious, something we love. And in order to serve that, in order to deeply love, to deeply serve, we must understand it. So it expands. And then in order to understand those things, it expands again. In order to understand one thing that we love deeply and fully, we must understand everything else. And when we understand everything else and its interconnection with what we find beautiful, then as in the cycle of life and the circle of life, as the object of beauty fades and dies, the baton of beauty gets passed on to something new. And it is associated, right, with the death of what we once cherished, that dies and something new is born. Hello, I'm Dane Rose, and I want to begin by highlighting one of the most shocking things that I've discovered at age 47, which is that no one has, and perhaps no one ever will, introduce me to life. No one's ever sat me down at any point and said, this is how life works, this is why it works. These are the most important aspects of life. And I find that incredible. Now, when that thought occurred to me, that 700 books in, that hundreds of courses in, that decades of introspection and learning into this life, I still didn't have a formal introduction to what this is all about, right? It seems absurd, right? So there's a moment of criticism. Why hasn't anyone pointed these things out, right? And it's fun. The adolescent's job is to criticize the inevitable and innate imperfections of everything, including the cultural blind spots that see so many of us going through life without knowing what's going on. But it's the adult's job to do something about it, right? The world is not perfect. The world is not fair. And if something bothers us, what to do about it? And this book, An Introduction to Life, is my response to that critique, my response to that irritation, that imperfection in my life. And although there are well over 100 chapters, it's the biggest book, naturally. It's a big topic that I've ever written. I thought I'd just randomly pick a few of the chapters and, you know, to get a little bit of a sense of what's involved. So on the first, let's see, the first thing we've got the big picture, evolution. We've got the 4 operating systems of the brain, the 4 brains, and the protocols they use to filter information and make decisions. The sociopathic or reptilian brain, the rational or pattern organizing brain, the empathic brain and its decision-making protocol, and the transcendent brain, right? Now, that's one of the most revolutionary understandings that I've come across that nobody introduced me to. If we go on to 3 random pictures or windows into the book on the next page of the contents, we've got the ego, self, and breathing. We've got chauvinism and its cultural underpinnings. We've got optimal roles. We've got PTSD, a stunning thing that I didn't learn about until I was 40 years old, that has more than a 30% invisible influence on every person and on the culture as a whole. The culture and its cult-like nature, how it can be our enemy, how it can be our friend, what its role is. We have cult and ego architecture, just going into that a little bit more deeply. The next page of, another 50 chapters, we've got key cycles in life, things that you want to be aware that repeat themselves over and over again, that have throughout history, the history of humanity, and will continue to repeat themselves. What are those key cycles and how do we attune to those? Emotional literacy, right? What is an emotion? How is it different from a feeling? Now, in a psychologically illiterate culture, we don't know the difference between an emotion and a feeling, as evidenced by the fact that you, as a representation of the 99%, cannot articulate it clearly. And if you do, your articulation will not agree with the next person. Feelings and emotions, right? Positive and negative emotions. Are they the same as good and bad? Like all of this, any one of these things takes, years to understand with wisdom and depth, right? But in most cases, we don't even know that we don't know about it. Grounded to reptile, right? Why we regress to the reptilian brain in traumatic states, right? Why our tether is the oldest brain. Purpose and meaning, how do we organize it? What is meaningful and what is not meaningful? Do you know the core ingredient in meaning? How to increase a life of meaning, how to decrease a life in meaning, right? Every question is a quest, and what are the quests that you're on? That's another page. 2 more tables of content pages. The deepest cuts to our humanity, right? We all live in a cult, in a culture, with a norm, a normal pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And how do those norms undermine the human operating, which is the empathic operating system in our brain? Understanding the math of cultural impact, investing in our future, individually and globally. Losing oneself. What does it mean when we say we lose ourself? What is that self, right? And when is it good to lose ourselves and find a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being? And when is it a disaster? When is it a crisis to lose ourselves and perhaps regress to an older pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, being? We have advice, criticism, and direction. Some tips, right, in life. Get excellent at something. The circle in life, right? Why is the circle the most fundamental shape in geometry, in the liminal space between masculine and feminine, between duality and the one? Learn from nature, right? When wrong ideas are right, right? When does a wrong idea take us in the right direction for our sustainable well-being? It's not true, but it takes us to a better place. And in those instances, do you cling to what's true, or do you value the improvement that comes to your life? So a very light dive into the table of contents. But my belief from thousands of conversations, hundreds of books, talking with various teachers, etc., my belief is that if you are exceptional, right, if you are an architect of ideas, if you understand the building blocks of consciousness and ideas and the way they create the illusion of our reality, that you can read a book like this and spark 12 or more % of new gestalts, of new configurations, right, of your consciousness, of your frameworks. You can iterate, you can evolve. If you're a naive teenager, as I was, 90% of this is useful grist for the mill, new populations of consciousness, of ideas, right? If you're an average middle-aged person, as I am, 30% of this, if you'll skim the chapters and highlight, ooh, there might be something there for me, there might be something there here, there might be something there, and then come back and actually read those chapters that speak to you, or use it as an I Ching and open up to something. That there is going to be things that you didn't know that are useful, that can propel you to a better quality of life. And that's what makes a book an act of love, right? It's an act of creativity But love, is a process. You have the love of need. I need you, the infant. Right? You have the love of desire. I want you, the adolescent. But then you have the love of giving. First to ourselves, adult love, and then to others. Right? I'm still learning. This book was a gift for me. Someone introduced me to life through this book, right? And 30% of the ideas catalyzed have had a positive impact in the course of articulating and writing, etc. But they may also be fruitful for you. That's the gift of the information age of technology. It's not either or. Right? Once I wrote the book for me, I can print more copies for you without diluting. Right? It's a gift to me to talk with someone who's read this book as opposed to someone who hasn't. Right? So, loving enough to care, caring enough to take time, taking enough time to see, seeing enough to understand what is being seen, understanding enough to empathize, to transcend the rational brain into the human realm of empathy, understanding enough to empathize, and empathizing with understanding enough to attune, and attuning successfully enough to succeed at facilitating survival, security of survival, a sense of love and belonging, self-esteem, the articulation of ideals and the paths that take us towards those ideals, called principles or best practices. And the respect we earn by following the best practices that create the world that we state that we want, right? Earned love, self-esteem. By developing our gifts, discovering what they are. I'm good at math. I'm good at listening in a way that people say things they've never said before. Discovering my gifts. And then bringing those gifts deeper and deeper into the world in a way that creates abundance for myself, for others, that creates value. And finally, serving something, becoming a part of something bigger than ourselves. That's adult love, and it's a process of blossoming, right? And if a book facilitates self-awareness, understanding, empathy, facilitates action that leads to increased survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, discovery and development of our talents and gifts, bringing those into the world, and becoming part of something bigger. If it does that, we have succeeded at bringing a profound state of love, a transformative state, a useful state of love, an adult state of love into the world.